Yeah, so I finally got my head around object relations. I thought you'd appreciate that. It's probably taking me a year to realize I couldn't get the object and the relations. And finally, it's like, oh, it's about relationship with an object, and the primary object is mom. But
Right.
object relations, like you always think, is it about a thing? Like, what
Like
does
a
it mean?
circle or something, or a
Yeah,
ball, or a,
yeah, an
a
object
car.
relation. Why do you call it object relations? Like, what's wrong with you, cohort or cohort or some cohort, whatever his name is?
Yeah, I don't actually understand that either. I might have been told that at one point in time why object relations is the chosen name for the modality, but I couldn't tell you why because I don't remember. But I do think it's an odd name. But in psychology, we like weird names and we love acronyms.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah, lots of acronyms. So what kind of psychology do you practice? So you consider yourself psychotherapist, CBT? Um,
Everything. I'm eclectic. Of
eclectic.
course, I was trained under David Mannock, and mostly, I mean, I had other influences, of course. Dr. Michelle Cox, who also I did quite a bit of training under in school, and she's more Jungian, which she argues is attachment based, and I think we can argue that to some degree, all modalities are attachment based, but my primary lens, I guess, or scope that I view the world is definitely through attachment,
Oh yeah,
EFT,
EFT,
emotion
right?
focused therapy. And then I have a specialized training in EMDR.
Oh, do you
And
really? I didn't know
I
you did
do. And
EMDR.
I love doing EMDR. It
Wow.
for some clients, it really bypasses that, talk therapy. It shortens the duration of therapy.
Wow.
It's like, what might take 10 or 20 sessions of talk therapy, we can knock out in 1 or 2 sessions of EMDR.
How does one get trained in that?
There's special trainings and certifications. I went and worked, did my training under Dr. Mansfield up in Portland.
Hmm.
And you have to be supervised by an EMDR supervisor. And I stick pretty closely to the Fidelity model. I don't really stray from it.
Is that the 8 steps?
Yeah, I don't remember how many steps there are off the top of my head, but I mean, I'm like, if the wheel isn't broken, don't try to fix it.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, of course I add my own little ways of relating with people, but
Absolutely.
I can't do EMDR over the phone. There might be, or over Skype or whatever, there might be a way to do it, but I tried it a little bit with the client tapping and that failed miserably. So I just decided I'm not trained. Yeah. I'm just not trained well enough, I guess, or whatever. So I'm just going to leave it alone because that could be really dangerous if a client really floods and can't ground themselves and I'm not there in person to help them. I don't feel equipped. And so I don't want to put the client in harm's way.
Do you use lights or do you use your fingers?
I actually use a wand that I hold.
Okay.
But the clinic just purchased an EMDR light bar, and
Yeah.
it has little vibrating like hand things that you can hold too.
Oh.
So I'm chomping at the bit to use that, and I can't.
I saw John used it the other day, so I'd like to see that. Well, maybe I'll see if I can get trained. I don't know if they'll train me if I'm not licensed. I'll just
No, they won't.
Jerks.
They won't. I know. I wish you can just get licensed. Go do like an online thing.
I will. And see if I can surprise someone. Yeah, I'd like to understand, like I was listening up to some videos of people who use it about how it kind of matches REM sleep and that using the eye movement to access memories. And my friends that have done it, I have, it seems like God clusters like client types, at least that's what I'm finding right now. So I have 2 types of clients. I have young teens, and then I have people with trauma. Like deep trauma for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like all my clients are in like category either teen with tons of trauma or adults with like horribly abusive pasts. And so you'll find like the physical manifestations when you start talking about stuff and you just go, oh, there's the embodied trauma, right?
Yes.
And these, 20, 30 years of abuse will do that to you.
Oh, absolutely. And we use a SUDS. I can't even remember what the acronym stands for right now. But it basically is the somatic, I can't remember what it is, but you know, using those somatic body signals to trace back to the root of the trauma.
Scale, social, subjective units of distress scale.
Yeah, subjective units of distress. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, all right, I'll check it out. Love that stuff. So, yeah, hey, thanks, man. I'm getting to know you a little better and kind of who you are and your therapeutic modality. We've actually never talked about that very much.
No, we haven't. We haven't. It's been good to get to know you, and I would love to see how you do counseling. I've done some of the pastoral counseling with Lanny, actually,
Yep.
and his interventions, or the way that he relates with me, and the words that he uses to reflect empathy and advanced empathy is very similar to the way I do it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I mean, it actually is kind of uncanny. I'm like, this is weird. Like,
well, we're all trained by David. Yeah.
I know, right? But even beyond that, I mean, I can tell where his training from David has influenced him, but this is his personal style. Like, this is how, you know, his personality coming through, just his natural relational, you know, uniqueness. And it's very similar to mine. I'm like, wow, this is a trip.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, we're all kind of learning how to develop our own therapeutic voice, as David says, right?
That's what it is. Yeah, therapeutic voice. Because every therapy is an art, right? It's a little different for everybody.
Yeah, it's like a practitioner kind of type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's applied science, I guess. Yeah.
Oh,
Right now, I tend to be phenomenological a lot, but I certainly do the advanced empathy and those things too. But I get a lot of content from just reading the body language and just asking about it.
Yeah.
David hadn't mentioned that to me. I don't know, like I'd be lost because I picked up all the signals, but I just would hold them and finally go, oh. I had a client yesterday, 2 days ago, I guess, and we started addressing a brother situation, and all of a sudden she looked down and her voice just kind of trailed and she went off into deep space. I was like, hey, Joe, as you started talking about Jack, I lost you for a moment. Like, where did you go?
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
It opens up, right?
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, so I just kind of do my counter-transference and reflect it back, and it generates some really interesting insights.
Oh, countertransference is wonderful when you use it for the greater good. Like, I am so grateful that David taught me not to be afraid of or ignore countertransference.
Exactly. I was scared. I was scared shitless out of it. But now I just use it. I just use it, and I'll say, hey, as you said that, I really kind of had this moment where it hit me really hard, and I felt extreme sadness. I mean, was that just me or was that you? And they'll be like, that's exactly what I feel like, right?
Yep. Yeah. It's great. I love countertransference now because it actually teaches me what is happening with the client. And I've gotten to a place where I'm very comfortable with my own countertransference. It used to be like, why am I feeling anxious? This is really weird. Why am I feeling so anxious? Now I can hold that. And if I can't catch it, usually I figure it out in the session, but if I can't, I can go talk with a colleague or something, or even think about it, and it kind of comes to me.
Yes.
And it's helped me heal.
Yes. No.
I mean, that's the cool, crazy thing.
The most awesome thing about therapy is the husband it's made me for Jocelyn, and the dad it's made me for my kids, and the person I become before God. You know, like you go, oh, like I see myself in my clients, and I go home and I do that. Like, maybe not as severe, but that pattern is my pattern.
Yes.
Like, it's wonderful, man.
Yes. It's like, we're all very basic and primal at our core. And it just takes another relationship to help us understand that in our reactions. And it's very empowering. David helped me do that. He was so good at helping me understand my experience being adopted, especially because he's adopted, right? But I noticed that he had healed and that it wasn't bothersome to him the way it was bothersome to me. And all I needed was to sit with him a few times to really understand why it bothered me. And then the power of it, or the oppression of it, literally disappeared. And I literally reframed. I was able to reframe adoption and the whole experience with God, with David's help sitting with me. And he actually helped Dwayne, my husband, understand it on a deeper level too. And it just, the power of that left as far as feeling bad about it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's actually what I wanted to talk to you about today, was your whole adoption experience. Because the other day we were exploring that, and I had no idea, like, the history that you came from. And specifically, I was sharing with Jocelyn your comments about adoption, and just thinking about how many times, without knowing, I had said those, at least thought them. Maybe I never said them out loud, but
Sure.
You kind of think those things, and yet you realize, well, especially, I mean, I don't mean to sound dumb, but you study optic relations, right? And Korhut, I always say his name wrong. I feel like a real gringo speaking German, whatever, or Belgium, whatever he was. But
I don't even remember his name, so yeah. you're good.
But he's one that kind of started. At least he was at the beginning of the optic relations, and he was apparently working in like social services, if I get the story right, and he was helping place children from severely abusive homes, like very horrible homes, into adoptive and foster care families. And his observation was that even though the new family fully accepted the child and loved them very deeply, and they had structure, and there was order, and there was tenderness, and there was compassion, the children always yearned to go back home.
Yeah. And
that's when he said, Freud's sense of what people call the hydraulic model, or the mechanistic model, that the baby just wants the milk, is not right. The baby wants mom. The children went home. And then and I was just reading this last week after you and I talked, and I was like, oh, like the dots were connecting.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah, people try to really simplify adoption trauma. And, as an adoptee, I followed that narrative too, because the narrative is told and written mostly from people who adopt.
Right.
So
say it again,
they have control over the narrative.
The adoption narrative has been told and mostly written by people who adopt. Wow.
Right. And so when you control the narrative, or the majority of the narrative, then that's the common teaching, right? So when my parents adopted me as an infant, I was already placed. I was taken from my biological mom, who was 17 when I was born, and placed, instead of right away with my parents, I was put in some kind of a foster home, orphanage thing, and don't know who gave me care, anything like that, to the point that I was actually dropped. And they called my mom, my adopted mom, they called her and said, "Do you still want her?" Because she was dropped.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, people look at that as like 6 weeks, I believe.
When you were taken from mom?
Oh, no, when I was taken from mom, it was right away.
Like, it was right away. Right. You were born.
Yeah. So my biological mom tells the story that, because I met her years ago, that she gave birth to me. She had me cesarean, and the nurse, cleaned me up, did all the things, laid me next to her, and left. And then a few minutes later, a nurse came in and said, "Oh my gosh, you can't have her," and took me, whisked me away. And she never saw me again. And my mom never got help. Nothing. They just sent her away. Wow. And a lot of times adoptive parents have their own trauma and nobody helps them work through it. I think it's a little better to have an open adoption, but there's still going to be adoption trauma and grief over the loss on both sides. That's why they call adoption an adoption triad, because it's adoptive parents, biological parents, and baby. And you can't get away from that triad, because that triad was sewn together by God. And people don't often use that triad or think about it when they adopt a child. And taking a baby away from their mom is traumatic, right? Because we co-regulate in a way. I mean, I don't know if I'm explaining this to
I
sound a
think
little too new agey.
no,
But
I'm getting what you're saying. I mean, your primary instinct when you're born, I mean, from everything I've read and studied about primary attachment and object relations, which we talked about before, is that even in the womb, your right brain is being formed by your mom. And
yes,
there is a natural yearning in your body, whether you know it or not, you're not going to be conscious of it until you're much older. But your
right.
body, your very system is crying out for mom. And
Yes,
so the trauma you'd say is embodied trauma. It's implicit memory, not explicit. You're not, going to
yes.
recall. It's going to be
Right,
present.
right. And you don't have the way to verbalize this. It's just
Exactly.
implicit. That's a good way. Yeah, it is implicit. And so when, the first 3 to 5 years of life, right? Because there's different not theologies, different hypothesis on that, but still early childhood, back into the womb, like you're saying, the baby actually borrows the mom's psyche, so to speak, to co-regulate with, right?
Yes, right. Right. The umbilical cord, right? Like it's totally down, almost like software download, right brain to right brain.
Yes. And when I was pregnant and I gave birth to our oldest son, all of my adoption trauma came back and smacked me upside the head like a ton of bricks.
Oh, my
It was
word.
really, and to this day, like, we're close, right?
Yeah.
But to this day, there's just that something missing. And we've both been able to verbalize that. There's something missing between us. And I don't know that it's a huge deal, right? Like it hasn't impacted our relationship, but it's different than with my youngest son, who I didn't have that adoption trauma hit me like a ton of bricks. I was able to just take him and bond in a more comfortable, natural way. Whereas with my oldest son, and there was some fetal distress for him too during labor. So that
course, yes.
also plays a part. But I actually went numb when I held him. My body did not respond. I mean, I loved him. Don't get me wrong. Like there was this sense of obligation, and I needed to protect him, and he was my baby, and I loved him no matter what. But I was numb. I didn't get those. It doesn't seem to me that I got the oxytocin release and all the cool stuff that all these people talk about after birth. And it didn't really happen for me with him until he got much older, like maybe a few weeks old. I started feeling that like happiness when he would look at me, but it was numb. And I thought I was absolutely nuts. And I actually went into a pretty severe postpartum depression because of it. And to the point that I was a little bit psychotic, like I was hearing things that weren't there.
Right.
And I just thought
that's huge.
It is. And now I can look back and go, holy smokes, like,
your system was totally like convulsing.
It was jammed up. Yeah, it absolutely was. Now I know exactly what it is, but at the time it is so just unnerving. Like you just think you're crazy, and you have this beautiful baby that everybody's fawning over, and you love this baby, but your system is not responding to what you logically know.
Right. Yeah, and and the guilt that moms feel, I think, is actually heavier than what dads feel by a long shot. And I think it's built into the system. And I can imagine you must have really struggled with that.
I did. I struggled with guilt. And then I just kind of like decided that I was just crazy. I was like, well, I guess I'm just nuts. That's the problem. And, I went immediately when I started getting like hearing things, right? And my anxiety was so bad. It was almost manic. I went to the county mental health place in Reno, because that's where my oldest was born. And they wanted to, instead of helping me, they wanted to give me antidepressants and then lock me up away from him. And And yeah, they wanted me to go. I mean, I came this close to being put on a mental health hold and being away from him for I don't know how long. And yes, I was ill, right? I was that sick at that time, but it was from trauma, and that trauma really exacerbated the depression symptoms, right? And it was a major depressive episode with psychotic features, mind you. But
Wow.
instead of threatening to pull me away from my child, they didn't help me bond. Nobody told us. My husband felt like he was at a loss, and it was because I was breastfeeding. And she got on the phone with my husband, who was a salesman back then and didn't know it. And he convinced her to let me go, and convinced her that the baby would be safe, blah, 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 blah. Thank goodness, because tearing me away from him would have made it worse.
Been worse. Well, what's interesting is that they didn't even get attachment. They didn't get the bond that's required, that locking you away and ripping your son away from you would have disastrous effects on you. And then you're going to have compounded trauma, because already you've got, as you're talking to me, here's what I'm thinking, right? We talked earlier about countertransfers. I had a ton of it right now. I was like thinking, well, first of all, you're dealing with depression and you're dealing with trauma, and those can be recursive in a spiraling way, right?
Yes, trauma, exactly.
Depression, and you're depressed about the trauma, and you get more trauma, and then on top of that, you're having psychotic moments. And guess what? Mental health says, we're going to rip away your baby from you and lock you up, and that should help.
Right. And I'm going to add on there that I have been victimized by the mental health system at this point most of my life, because I was 21 when I had him. So prior to that, I was locked away by my parents because I had gone, kind of the bad path, right? One of a very powerful EMDR session I did actually was around being 14 years old, and my adoptive parents not telling me where I was going, taking me to this institution and closing the doors behind me and walking away while I was screaming and pounding on the door for them to turn around and take me. The people took me, and I mean, they restrained me and gave me probably a B-52, which is Halidol and some other things to really calm somebody down. So I've had nothing but attachment trauma compounded by the mental health system. So when I met Dr. David Manock in undergrad, for him to put words to my experiences was so empowering and important. And I knew then I needed to do better as a mental health counselor, and do better in the respect of helping people with their attachment. And I'm telling you, it works. Of course, there's going to be clients that don't get it, right? Or that I'm not a good match for. But overall, when I use an attachment lens with clients, and I help them just find language to their mental health symptoms, and not pathologizing it, but saying, no, this is from abuse and and explaining it, people go, oh, wow. Yeah. So having this diagnosis actually is just a way to bill insurance. It doesn't actually define me, because my experiences are absolutely attachment related. And the core of every single mental health symptom I had growing up, every one of them was all attachment trauma related, and it all could have been prevented, or there could have been an intervention, and it could have brought my family and I closer. Right. And my parents could have evolved into stronger people, right? And understood their own transference with me. It could have been handled so much better. And I just look back on it and I'm like, God, but mental health in the 80s and 90s was really not very good.
Yeah. I mean, 70s, 80s, 90s. I was quite young back then, but I have a slight recollection, which I processed with David a while back, about Oregon, releasing all the patients at one point, just reacting and making some pretty bad decisions there. Um,
Right.
as you're talking to me, I heard you say, you know, your heart's been healed, and I believe you, but I still feel a lot of ouch. Like you're
Yes.
still right. There's still some. Maybe it's not ouch, but there's a passion which I really love. I think maybe what drove or motivates you or helps you, you connect with people. But there's something in there. At least I felt of either pain, anguish, passion. So something.
You're
Am I
good.
onto
You're good. Yes, you are.
it?
You need to go get that PhD.
I'm working on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is painful. It's not the kind of pain that drives me to anger
Right.
or to bitterness. It's the kind of pain that I think the thorn in the side, maybe, that
Yeah.
Paul talks about. But I don't know that I need it removed at this point, right? Like
Exactly.
Paul begged for it
Yeah.
to be removed. It's a very good pain because it keeps me grounded and focused and it doesn't haunt me. So
Right.
I can freely talk about it and discuss it for educational purposes, things like that. Because I've had so many people who are adopted say, "You put words to my experience. Thank you."
Oh yeah, I could see
And
that.
that's important. Yeah.
I also think it'd be the kind of pain that kind of drives the compassion. Right.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
we talked about your these amazing experiences. You want to go back to the beginning and just talk about your family, how you ended up getting adopted. There's a really fascinating, I think, story of that alone,
Oh,
even redemption. I mean, just talk about your family system going way back, and
mm.
there's a
So,
lot,
okay. There is a lot. It's very rich. And I probably only understand the tip of the iceberg, honestly. God gets the whole picture, right?
right?
Okay. So the way have been told, I met my biological mother and father. I met my biological mom when I was 22 or 23. And I met my biological father when I was probably in my late 20s,
Okay.
26, 27, somewhere in there, maybe mid to late 20s.
Wow.
So, from my perspective, I, at 5 years old, you know, some kids, older kids, told me some stuff about having a baby that I needed to clarify with my mom and my adopted mom. So when I say my mom and dad, I'm actually talking about my adopted parents because they
Yeah.
are my parents.
Yeah.
So I'll differentiate and I'll say maybe first mom or first father. I try to stay away from the biological mom and biological
Oh,
father because
okay.
but I do default to saying it because in the adoption world, one reason that biological mother and biological father is not really looked positively on those gosh, I'm tongue tied right now, because that narrative was written by the people adopting. So they
Oh,
say biological mom and biological father as a way, in their opinion, to further push away genetics and the
oh,
biological
I
family.
didn't know
They
that.
deduce it down to just biology. This is just your biology,
I
right?
use that all the time. Bio dad, bio mom. Wow.
I
So
do. I do. Yeah.
is it best to ask if you have a client that's been adopted or maybe multiple kind of homes they've been in that they may refer to foster parents as dad even? Is it best just to
Yeah.
ask them how they refer to people or
Yeah.
what's a
Oh,
good
yeah.
way to
I
go
think
about
that's
that?
wise. I think it's wise. I've been in the habit for so long of saying bio dad and bio mom. It just is there. It's like committing suicide, for example. People are getting away from that language because it makes it sound like the person has broken the law. And in some
Right.
states, it still is illegal to kill yourself.
Wow.
But I try to stay away from saying commit suicide, but I still slip and say that too because it's
Right.
been years and years and years of the same verbiage.
Right.
So my natural mom was 16, I believe, when she got pregnant with me, and natural father was 17. They were in high school, they were in love, all the things, right? And he wanted to go into the service and he wanted to take care of the family when he found out she was pregnant. Well, she hid her pregnancy because she knew that she would be forced to have an abortion with me if she had told her mom, my grandmother, in the first or second trimester. Because Roe v. Wade was overturned a year or two before I was born, actually. I can't remember if it was 72 or 73 when it was overturned, but I was born in 74.
Right.
So, she didn't really have prenatal care or very good prenatal care that I'm aware of, right? Because she waited so late. But basically, she was just told she was going to put me up for adoption. There was no discussion about it. It was like, no, this is what you do. And she was shamed into it. So I think she was kind of like, the way she tells the story and the way that I can recall it, I think it was a deer in headlights moment for her. I don't think she knew exactly what she wanted or what to do. I think she probably would have married my first father, my natural father, but I don't know. So he really raised a fuss because his rights didn't even matter. I mean, that was the crazy thing. He said when the social worker basically forced him to sign over his rights at the LA County of Adoptions, he was throwing chairs around the room. He didn't want to. He wanted to keep me. And they said, there's no way you can. My, I'll say biological grandmother, whatever. She actually tried to run him over when she saw him because he wouldn't sign away his rights. I mean, he was really, really bullied into it. And she admitted to it, right? And then he confirmed it. So, shaming people to that degree and not trying to keep families together is really not the right way to go. Now,
failure number one, you said you've been failed by the mental health institutions your whole life. That's like failure number one.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you have a whole entity making these decisions for you without your knowledge, power, or control, as an adult, I mean, you have to as a baby, right? You're not in control as a baby, but these systems have made these huge decisions for you. And it's like, you just kind of get passive with it, right? Like, I'm not in control of my own life. So my parents did nothing wrong. To be very, very frank, my parents had no idea of the backstory. They just wanted a baby. They waited 5 years to get me. They put in the time, money, and effort and work to do it legally and to do it the right way. So, and when I was 5, I asked my mom about, if it was something like, when you gave birth to me or whatever, did it hurt? And then she told me at 5. And here's the weird thing about that, Phil. I remember her telling me, and I remember this feeling. Now, I couldn't put words to it then, but I felt like, oh, that makes a lot of sense because I always knew I didn't belong there.
And you're 5 years old and you felt that?
I was 5 years old.
Wow.
I knew I didn't belong there and I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. That was my implicit memory of not feeling home or belonging. And my parents did nothing to, they didn't beat me. They didn't put me down verbally. You know what I mean? They weren't saying things to make me feel like I wasn't welcome. That's just something they can't control, right? And I think my mom and dad made a good decision about telling me when I asked, and they were always very open and said, if you ever want to find your biological parents, we support you. I think the way they handled it, especially for a 70s adoption, was spot on. With the tools and knowledge they had, I really commend them for it because it's not like they were given some in-depth counseling, and attachment therapy or anything before all this happened.
They somehow just got it.
Right. And I think with what they knew, like I said, at the time, I think I give them an A+. They didn't know that once my mom told me that I was adopted, they had no idea. And I didn't even know it. I look back on it, I know what it is now. I grieved. I immediately began grieving my first family. I had no idea other than they were in high school. I didn't know them. It was a closed adoption. I mean, I heard she was Italian or something, and that was it. And that she had arthritis in her knees. So I have no idea about my genetics. It's all a mystery. And I felt alone, and I was an only child. I felt alone and I felt abandoned and I felt like I didn't belong. and it was grief. And of course, you know, hindsight's always 20/20, right? Like, if somebody would have helped me understand that it was grief, and if they would have let me grieve the loss, I think it would have drastically changed my life. The problem is now I'm set up at 5 years old to believe that I don't belong. It affirmed that I don't belong. It was weird. It was just odd how that, like, oh yeah.
You felt it, and now this revelation just kind of solidified it, consolidated.
It really did. Yeah. And then, you know, so I have dyslexia, I have ADD, which is probably back then it was more ADHD with the hyperactivity in it. Which is common for kids that are adopted. Actually, there's a higher instance of learning disabilities and mental health stuff. But I definitely became, around, because I didn't learn how to read until I was much older. I faked it. I have no idea how. But I also have muscular dystrophy, so I could never really run very good. But it was just enough to where obviously I couldn't keep up with my peers. And so I was stuck into the remedial classes. But I didn't have a low IQ. That wasn't the issue.
I was going to say, you really probably didn't belong there.
No. And that again, reaffirmed and solidified, I don't belong. I don't belong anywhere. I can't do anything. And I was so alone and so depressed. And, you know, if you compound that with the fact that now I can see my mom, who, it's given me a lot of compassion for her, but she was profoundly depressed throughout my childhood. So that just, not to mention she has all of these body image problems. And so she was always telling me that I was fat and to lose weight. She didn't use those words, but that's how they hit. And I really wasn't heavy growing up, but I had a different build than her. And she was always putting her own body down. And she was sometimes bedridden for the weekend because she really, now, I mean, I look back, I'm like, she was just really depressed, but she would have these migraines and things like that. Well, she was just so depressed. So of course that didn't help the fact that I was already feeling depressed and alone. So by the time I hit middle school, I was labeled by the system and put on probation at 12 for having a conduct disorder, which is really if you keep following that path, it means that as an adult, you end up a sociopath with no conscience.
But you end up in juvie and then you're a sociopath.
Yeah. But I had attachment problems, right? Like a lot of kids with conduct disorder.
But you're marked, right? The sooner they put that on you as conduct disorder now, no matter where you go, that label is across your face.
Yep. Well, and then let's also sprinkle in there sexual abuse that happened when I was in elementary school and then again in high school. There was sexual abuse on top of that. So, I mean, by the time I was 16, I was nothing but angry and depressed, and I didn't care about my future. I didn't care about anything. I mean, I really didn't. I remember because I got kicked out of public high school for setting somebody's hair on fire in class. Probably not a good thing.
We can laugh about it now, but
well, I mean, he called me a slut or something. I mean, he called me a name. He was sitting in front of me, and I had a cigarette lighter because I smoked, of course. And I just chink, and I caught his hair on fire.
And if you're listening right now, we're just saying we're sorry, okay? Like,
I'm not sorry.
You're not sorry, never mind.
I'm not sorry, no. I don't even know if he remembers. I mean, we're friends on Facebook. I should actually ask him and be like, hey, do you remember when I set your hair on fire?
You totally should.
I think I will.
That's so great.
His name was Rich.
I have no idea, like, you get to know someone and you realize like just the layers that people go through. I don't know how else to describe it, but I'm seeing you like a kid with just layers on you, layers and layers of being misunderstood, misidentified, not connected to, not treated like a human being, ripped from your family, no choice, no understanding, not feeling wanted. And then you're dealing with, a wonderful, wonderful mom, but struggling with depression. And like he's going, well, no wonder by the time you're 16, you're blown out.
Well, yeah. And let's actually add another layer to that, shall we? My mom was rendered infertile when she did not consent to getting a hysterectomy in the 60s. They went in for exploratory surgery, found benign tumors that crushed her lady parts. And they just, instead of, stitching her back up and saying, hey, these are your options, which I don't know, maybe the only options at the time were to give her a full-blown hysterectomy. They just took it out. So she woke up and she wasn't able to have kids in her 20s.
Oh, wow.
And
I had no idea. I know your mom, of course, but I had no idea.
That's just brutal. And
brutal.
Then they didn't actually put her on any medications. So she came in a year later for follow-up, and her voice had dropped a bunch of octaves, apparently, and she was growing a mustache. And he went, oh, no, we need to put you on estrogen. Nobody did. And so she's dealing with being infertile on her own, right? She meets my dad. They're in their 30s. He's already been married once and has a biological daughter who's 16 years older than me. But anyway, he meets my mom. They immediately decide they want to adopt, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So my mom was dealing with her own issues of infertility, struggling with those on her own, struggling with being a mom and what that means. And then within that first year of adopting me, the LA County of Adoptions tells them that my first mom can change her mind at any time and take me back. So tell me that does not interfere with bonding.
Jeez.
So they had to have a social worker come in when I was a year, and make sure everything's okay and sign off, blah, blah, blah. But I can only imagine from especially my mom's point of view, how hard that must have been to bond with me. Now, throughout my life, my mom was not a nurturer. She was too anxious to nurture. I don't know if it was her own low self-esteem or what, okay, but I know she tried. My dad ended up being more of my nurturer. My dad is better at attuning to me and has been my whole life overall, but he's a dad, so he's also a dude.
Right? Yeah.
Right?
I get that, yeah.
When I started my period, my dad took me to go get supplies because my mom felt so inept because that was ripped from her so young. She had no understanding of how to help me as I sexually matured because, I look back, I was so humiliated that my mom wouldn't go with me and felt like I interpreted it as she was embarrassed by me. I don't think that's it at all. I think she just was stuck in her own trauma and didn't know how to walk through it. And my dad, bless his heart, he takes me to go get feminine supplies for the first time. And he goes, well, there's a whole wall of stuff. Pick something. Well, I don't know.
Yeah. I have to share, I have a similar experience. So Jocelyn, I think, was not doing well health-wise when we had to buy my daughter's first bras. And so we went to Kohl's. And I kind of said the same thing. I'm like, look, here's other size, right? Here's some small to big. Why don't you go do some shopping? Just try them on. And then we came home. I kid you, with 9 bras. She wanted it. I'm like, okay. So Jocelyn looks at me and says, you bought 9? Nobody has 9 bras.
No.
I just said yes to everything. I was like, okay, well, she knows what she's doing. Like this one and that one.
Oh, that is amazing. I love that.
Yeah, so I would love to have been a fly on the wall of that experience with your dad and you. That would have been awesome.
Well, it was, I actually thought my dad was annoyed with me. And I think he was just really anxious. But to me,
yeah, he was annoyed.
To me, yeah. He was just like, well, there's a whole bunch of stuff there. Pick some, He's got a very commanding voice, and that's just naturally. He's not really a jerk at all, But so anyway, that was really difficult because by then I'm thinking, I'm just worthless. And my parents, I never felt that my parents had a vested interest in me emotionally. Now, I know that's not true as an adult, but as a child, with my experiences and how layered they were, it gave me that interpretation.
Oh man. And how do you, as looking back and now being a practitioner in mental health, being so aware of that a child who's gone through the trauma that you went through, you're at 16 years old now, and unless you get help from someone, there's no other way to interpret that, right?
Right.
Because at 16, you can't see what you see now. You can see that your mom was struggling. Oh yeah, she loved you, and she was just embarrassed or anxious or didn't know what
Whatever.
to do. And
Mm-hmm.
your dad very lovingly took you and probably was really anxious and said, "All right, take care of it." But at
Right.
16, you interpret that
Well, I
like,
think for
oh,
then, if I said 16, I didn't mean to. No, I think I was like 14 or something when
14.
that
Okay,
happened,
yeah,
but still,
14.
yeah.
Yeah. But how important it is that we improve how we interact with children who have to have gone through something like that.
Yeah, because I mean, I think I was saying by the time I was 16, I was just full blown enraged. Oh, I had been kicked out of school. That's what it
Yeah, that's
was.
cool.
And I was going to continuation school where I had to take the bus. And I actually recall being so depressed, taking that stupid bus ride, 20, 30-minute
Right.
bus ride to continuation school. I hated it. I really, really hated everything about my life and about myself. I mean, it was bad. And this was not me trying to get attention. Like, this was
Right.
legitimate.
Right.
I had no attachment to people, really. I did not feel attached to anybody. And it was very,
It's a horrible
you
place
know,
to be when you're
ooh,
a teenager, right? And you don't have the language, of course, but looking back, you can go, that's what that feeling was, that feeling lost or
it
feeling
was terrible. Yeah.
invisible or whatever that is. But you can go, oh, I was never attached to as a child. Like no one ever just attuned, bonded, resonated with me.
Right. Exactly. And so when I was 16, I'd kind of gone from job to job. It's like I was trying to be okay, but I was just doing it because that's what you're supposed to do. I really didn't have much of a work ethic or anything because I just didn't care. I was just doing what I thought I was supposed to be doing.
Fair enough.
And right. And I don't know that many teenagers at 16 have these great high work ethics, but
Right.
I did watch my parents work hard. So I did pick up a work ethic from them. So I went to work at KFC because my mom's friends said they were hiring at KFC. And get this is so funny because you have to think now I have a chip on my shoulder at 16. Okay.
That's
I
right.
I do not care about authority very much. Right.
Right.
Like I grew up in a small redneck town, which I was super gothic at this point, and I just hated it. So I went in and I filled out my application, gave it to the owner, and he looked at it. I forgot what was missing. Maybe my social security number or something. I don't remember. Something was missing on the application. And he goes like this and pushes the application back to me through the counter. And he goes, "Don't come back until you have this filled out properly." Now,
Whoa.
normally I think this is where where the Holy Spirit, that still small voice, talked to me. And I had no idea that's who it was at the time, because normally I would have 2 middle fingers,
Right.
left there, screw you, I don't want this job anyway. I didn't. I did I gave him whatever he needed on the application and came back and turned it in. And I started working at KFC, which is where I met my now husband. He was the assistant manager of that KFC.
Oh, wow. Now, see those
And
great connections. I love that. I mean, even though you didn't know it was the Lord, right? You can go back, oh, for some strange reason in that moment, I listened to that something in me and I didn't put 2 middle fingers in his face and I did it.
Right. Now,
God.
let me just add something to that. My whole life growing up, I believed in God. Okay. My parents taught me about God.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't go to church or anything. I didn't grow up like, as an evangelical or anything like that. But I knew a God, a cosmic God, whatever, Jesus. Okay. And I was saved at that point because a couple of years prior to that, a good friend of mine scared me half to pieces about the end times and Revelation. So I accepted Christ, the turn and burn, thing.
It's good fire insurance.
Right. That's exactly what it was. Okay, cool. But God uses all the things, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So I had been earnestly praying, literally sometimes on my hands and knees as a young child, begging God to bring somebody into my life and bring me a family that I could connect with. Now, I thought that would be my natural family.
Yeah.
But God heard my prayers, and he reminds me daily now with my husband and family that he does daily. He reminds me that this is a result of my prayers as a child.
Yeah.
So here I am, full-blown rebellion. At the time then I was dabbling in paganism and witchcraft, more as like whatever, the God thing wasn't working for me, right? So I mean, I'm full blown, like I don't give two craps about God or anything really. So I start working at KFC and I meet this guy who I thought was a big dope. he knows Spanish, or should I say Spanglish.
Spanglish, yeah.
And the cook is also the cook is Mexican, right? And they're obviously talking about me in Spanish.
Right.
And I hear the word chi-chis, and I go over there and I'm like, punch him in the arm kind of thing. And he goes, all I said in Spanish was, I wonder if you know what chi-chis mean. And I'm like, this guy's an idiot. He was kind of, well, I mean, at first I thought he was rednecky. He drove this big jacked up Toyota truck.
Yep.
I just thought, what a dingbat. Well, anyway, we worked together for a few days and I was like, okay, maybe he's not such a dingbat. And he would like do the mopping and stuff for me.
Yeah, love that.
Like, I know. And I could tell he liked me. There was an energy there.
Right.
And I was dating at the time some dude that I tried to break up with that I couldn't, because every time I tried to break up with him, and he was like super gothic and sad. Every time I tried to break up with him, he'd say he was going to kill himself. I was
wow.
So I asked Dwayne on a date to Denny's, which was down the road, and he said yes. So we went to Denny's on our first date.
Living large.
He was so shy, and I was like, I like this guy. Now, at the time, I was not looking for anybody like my father. In fact, safe to say, I did not like my dad. At that time, right?
Right.
My husband is so similar to my dad. It is insane. Had no clue at the time.
Right. You're not making those connections back then.
No, of course not. And so we ended up, like, he went to Southern California. So we're five hours away from Southern California, right? Like LA area.
Yep.
And we're in the middle of the high desert. And he's like, well, I'm going to go get a new stereo for my truck. You want to go with me? Now he's 19, I'm 16. So I set up this big, huge lie with my parents and say, I'm going to go stay at my good friend's house. And I bail with him and they cover for me. So I go over the weekend with him to Southern California. Right. And that's where we like just super fall in love, all the things, blah, blah, blah. His truck breaks down. Somehow we managed to limp it home. I don't even we had to get a tow truck and all this, but he had money, right? He was 19. He had his own apartment. He had good credit. And he wanted to really spend a lot of money on me and stuff. And I said, no. And I thought, wow, this is cool. Like there's a guy that's treating me really well and spoiling me. Like my dad. So long story short, I was on probation. We're dating. And my parents threatened to call my probation officer and send me to a group home. And so Dwayne and I bailed. We ran away. My dad was really angry with us. And actually, it's so funny because I did do a lot of really sneaky, awful things. But there's this one thing that my dad was accusing Dwayne and I of doing that we actually didn't do. And he's like, that's it. I'm calling your PO. You're leaving. I can't take it anymore, blah, blah, blah. And Dwayne looks at me and he goes, be ready in 30 minutes. So I locked my bedroom door. I turned on the music. I packed a bag. I popped out my screen. I went and met him in the street.
The movie, man.
It was like, yeah.
Yeah. With a country western song in it. So how old were you at this point when you fled with Dwayne?
I did. And we went to Southern California and we were homeless. How old? I was 16.
Oh, you're still 16. So you're not, I was thinking maybe you guys are 17 at this point, but you're still 16.
I'm 16. And
Wow.
we live on the streets for 4 months. I mean, just crazy. There's a whole nother story there. But I get in touch with my parents finally. And I said, look, I want to marry this guy. And my parents said, fine. In fact, my dad told Dwayne, you want her so goddamn bad, you can have her. And we were actually planning on my parents allowing me to get married.
Right.
But we got caught sleeping in a car in the early morning hours in San Bernardino, California. And of course, they ran my name, and there's a no bail warrant out for my arrest. And thank God my mom gave them the wrong last name of Dwayne, because they thought he had changed his last name and they couldn't arrest him. If they would have arrested him and charges had been pressed, he would be a registered sex offender. But that didn't happen. So I went to San Bernardino Juvenile Hall, which, I mean, I've been to juvenile hall before, but this was really rough.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to pause a second. I had some counter transcripts about a sentence ago. When you talked about being in the truck and being arrested, your voice really changed, and you got like really sorrowful for some reason. You said you guys were sleeping in the truck and you got caught by the police.
When we were sleeping in the car and got caught by police?
In the car, not the truck. I
don't know.
I feel like I got really sad talking about maybe calling, or they called your parents or something, and there's something in you kind of shift a little bit. I felt.
Oh, did it? No, I mean, if it did, I didn't catch it because it's. I think maybe because it's leading up to me getting married. Actually,
Gotcha.
This was like the coup de grace. So
gotcha, okay.
They take me to juvenile hall. Dwayne gets in touch with my parents. They ship me back to the small town. I go in front of the judge. My parents had wrote a letter to the judge. They wanted me to marry him. He said yes. He signed off on it. I wasn't going to get any more issues with probation. Crazy, right? Yeah. So 4 days after I turned 17, my parents and I went to Las Vegas, and they signed for me to get married. And we did have a small wedding in Las Vegas that my parents paid for, a wedding and reception. And that was the beginning. So my birthday is 9/11, and then our anniversary is 9/14.
Wow. You got 17 married in Vegas. It's been 30 years now.
Yeah.
I think this is one of the most encouraging stories I've ever heard.
It is, right? I mean,
if parents are struggling with their kids, like they're going off the deep end, they'll never be okay. Sometimes they are okay.
Sometimes they are. I mean, we were really stupid together. Like, we did a lot of dumb things. I mean, and fortunately, there was like a 3 or so, maybe 4-year period where I got Dwayne into meth, and we were doing meth, and, we smoked a lot of pot, went to raves, abused alcohol, had parties, blah, blah, blah. But we never wanted kids. And we're like, we're just going to party our lives away. Well, I mean, we would separate and then come back together. I mean, it was just, it was a shit show.
Right. You guys have been through it.
Huh?
You guys have been through it.
We have. We grew up together. I mean, we really have grown up together. And when I was 20, I was on antibiotics for some kind of a lung infection thing. Anyway, I did not know, and I was not warned that could lessen the effects of the pill. And lo and behold, I end up pregnant with our oldest son. And you know what's crazy?
That's so great. I'm sorry.
What's so crazy?
All these moments that God just kind of broke in, right? You just broke in.
I know. What's super crazy about that is I knew God put that baby in my uterus. Like, I was like, oh, this is God. I got to stop what I'm doing. I had a reverence at that point. And I wasn't seeking God, and neither was he at that time.
Yeah, but God was seeking you.
Absolutely. Always, always, always. And I can look back on that, and I'm so grateful that I got pregnant, and that, I mean, it's just incredible. Well, even back up, I missed an important part. After we got married, like after it was all said and done, reception's done, we're sitting in the parking lot of the Excalibur Hotel and Casino, because that's where we got married and that's where we had a couple night stays, right? And we're sitting in our Pontiac Grand Le Mans with the windows down and 100 and some degree weather, right? We're smoking cigarettes.
I love all the detail you remember. I feel like I'm literally watching like a movie scene from Ridley Scott or something. Or
it could be. We're sitting there smoking cigarettes, and I look out my window, and okay, I don't know how familiar you are with Vegas, but like when it gets really hot in the, this was like the mid-afternoon. When it gets hot, there's no sign of life. Like even cockroaches are seeking shelter. You know what I mean? Because it's hot still. It's mid September.
Right.
In Vegas. And I look up and I go, there's a bird coming into the car. This bird just appeared from the sky, came in my window, circled around us, and went out Dwayne's window. And we were both like, whoa. Now, we didn't talk about it then, but we've, of course, talked about it since then. We both knew that was God blessing our marriage.
Oh, wow.
I knew it in my soul.
Bring a tear to your eye, won't it? That's amazing.
Isn't it, though?
Yeah.
I was like, what? And like, since then it's taken me to scripture, of course, about, God taking care of everybody, even the sparrows, right?
Yeah.
And his eye is on the sparrow. And that actually is amazing to me. God just, like you said, kept breaking through at these crucial points in my life and blessing me when I was full blown in rebellion. I was not in love with him. I didn't care about him. I didn't care about anybody. I didn't even care about myself yet. And so now I'm getting all teary-eyed. Yet yeah. God continued to pursue me because he loves me and he loves Dwayne that much.
He loved you so much.
Yeah. And it's touching, when I really slow it down and I tell the story.
But isn't that something that you just kind of want everyone to experience sometimes, is just to kind of go, like, can you just wake up and see that all the things you've been through, right? Even the depths of your sorrow and pain, wasn't God there in some capacity? And you can't say that for people, right? You can't right. Force the frame. You don't want to force the paradigm, but there's something so beautiful about that. It's moving.
There is. It is. And he does things secretly, okay, I can look back on my story up until my 20s and think it's so obvious now, but at the time it was not obvious. That still small voice of God. Like even going back to KFC, that had to have been the Holy Spirit leading me back. There's no way I would have normally done that.
It was, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
And so God gave me Dwayne, and we worked out a lot of our attachment issues together without any kind of help. But we really bonded after he survived cancer the second time, which is like a whole nother story too. But I felt like that was the point in time where we bonded. It took us a lot longer to bond and get that deep bond. We were close, but that's when he became my safe haven and I became his.
Oh, that is powerful. I was thinking to myself as you were talking right now that God kind of used all that partying and the ups and downs of that. You said the separations, that God kind of used that strangely to create attachment in you. And I guess you could say maybe even though you might say that's not a healthy lifestyle, you wouldn't encourage people to do that to get attachment. Right. But somehow you could say the Lord was maybe laying foundational elements of your attachment there. But it was in the depths of pain that we actually bond the most, right? That's mine and Johnson's story true. Too.
That's cool.
It's the pain that brings you close, man.
It is. It absolutely is. And it does, David always says, like, experiencing the pain together helps break up the heaviness of the problem, whatever it is. And it's true.
Yeah. I feel like right now I could, we've been at this for about a little over an hour right now. And I think I would like to come back and hear 2 more parts of your story.
Okay.
Kind of the next segment into your 20s. And kind of what led to pole jams eventually. But also I'd like to hear about you and Dwayne's story around surviving the cancer and then how that brought you guys together. That's like a whole nother story. And I'd like
That
to also
is, you actually need Dwayne for
I
that
was gonna
too.
say, I was just gonna say that I'd like to hear Dwayne's take on your 4 months in LA.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, right.
So can we agree to a part 2? Or like part 3?
Sure.
Maybe?
Oh yeah,
Okay,
I'd love to. I'd love to.
let's do
Yeah.
that. That's amazing.
Okay.
Man, this has been so good. This has been rich. I will when I post part 1, I will put your information down. Can I grab a bio from someplace and just kind of put your information on it? Do you have can you send me a
Yeah,
URL or a place where I can find your information?
I will. I'll send it to you. It's my profile. You can just copy what I wrote on my profile for Shangri-La,
Oh,
where I'm
excellent.
employed. But I'll send you the link, and you could just copy and paste that. It's a
It's fine.
perfectly good bio.
The Shangri-La, Cynthia Shaver. Here we go.
Oh, look at you.
Is it W? No, it's Community Health. Let's see. WC Health?
No,
W?
no, no. So
Shangri-La.org. Here we go.
yeah. So you have to go under mental health services, not behavioral health, but mental health services on the homepage.
It says, so I have one that says, looks like you got blue hair in the picture. Is that the right one?
Yeah. Yeah,
Cynthia's
that's when
a licensed professional. Okay, good. And if people wanted to reach out to you, would you be open to that? And could I put an email address for you in this
Yeah,
URL?
why don't you put my private email, not my work email?
Of course.
So what I'll do is I'll just send you my private email. And that way you can put my private email on there for people to reach out. And I'm more than happy to respond. So I guess part 2 and part 3 is cancer and strippers and Jesus, and how all of those came together for the greater good of the Lord.
I can't wait. I think this is such an encouraging story. And before we leave today, I actually wanted to ask you this, because we touched this the other day, but we didn't really touch it today. If you were to give just a word of sage advice to someone when they're interacting with someone who's been adopted, you said something to me that really hit home the other day. You said that the hardest thing would be, people said, well, aren't you so lucky? And look,
right.
you were chosen.
Right. So yeah, my parents would always tell me, it was mostly my mom, that I was chosen. And that's a normal narrative. And I don't fault her for that, or them. I'm not upset or have ill will towards this anymore. But the chosen piece made it very difficult for me because it's disingenuous. It made it very difficult for me to believe that I was chosen by God, because I wasn't chosen. Okay. Like I was the second choice. I wasn't the first choice. My mom would have had biological children. She told me if her and my dad could have had biological children, she probably would have had 4 or 5.
Right.
And that actually doesn't. So here's the thing. The truth sets you free, right? The truth is I was a second choice. I was God's plan. It was a second choice because Earth is flawed, right? And I am perfectly okay with that. In fact, if anything, that makes it more powerful, because you know what? Moses, when you look at Moses, he was rejected, right? He had to be rejected, and he had to be adopted by the enemy even. And so I don't think that me being second choice is a bad thing, but I wasn't chosen. My parents didn't, it's not like they went to a baby factory and they're like, this one. So that always kind of set weird with me. And so when people said God chose you, I would immediately reject that. And I did it just out of not because I was trying to be defiant. So it was hard for me to really connect with God.
Oh, the pain, yeah, because especially if you're interacting like in the evangelical or specifically some of the Reformed traditions where they're going to emphasize, God's providence and choice, it's going to be really confusing to someone who's always heard, well, you were chosen, but you go, no, I really wasn't. I was kind of, you're going to feel that way. It's be hard to make that connection to the love of God and what that means to be chosen.
Exactly. It meant nothing to me. It was so watered down. It really had no oomph or anything. And people would tell me all happy, like, you're chosen. I'm like, okay, whatever. So I couldn't, I mean, that was a huge barrier to connect with God. The second one was being told I was grateful. So oftentimes adoptees were told to be grateful, or aren't you glad you weren't aborted? And I used to say that. I wanted to find my first mom and dad and thank them for not aborting me. That is so common, and it is such BS, because as I told you the other day, when the kids were probably 12 and 8, I was reading a book. It was called Growing Up Adopted or something like that. And he made the point about gratitude. He has his PhD in psychology, and he's an adoptee. And he was talking about these misnomers. And he said, like, one thing is being grateful creates like a codependency in people who are adopted, because, we have to be so grateful, and, we just owe people so much. And that hit me hard. And I called my kids out and I said, hey guys, are you glad that I kept you, that Dad and I kept you, and we didn't give you away or abort you? And it was so funny, because here they are, like 12 and 8, and my oldest son looks at my younger son and he goes, we both say yes. We're really grateful. And and then I asked Wayne, right? I asked my husband, I said, have you ever thought about thanking your parents for keeping you and not aborting you? And he goes, no. I mean, just like, no. And I started asking people who were biological, and they're like, no. And I was like, wow, this is really a thing. We put that extra pressure on adopted people, which is really awful. And we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't be grateful for being adopted. Like, that puts this narrative to where you can never have safety and just be a jerk and be a normal kid, because you have to be grateful. And we adopt these international children, and we tell them to be grateful for taking them out of these third world countries into a first world country. And we do that, and we take away their voice and their ability to grieve.
Oh, wow. That's good. And so one thing I'm hearing you say, if someone's listening to this down the road, they're like, you would say, when interacting with someone who's been adopted, just kind of avoid that language in general, just connect. And if anything, the time comes, express empathy, if the moment's right, for the trauma they may have gone through of being adopted and not being able to have that primary family or primary attachment.
Right. And I've even had people who are adopted push back on me and say, well, I don't remember the trauma, so I'm not affected. I'm like, well, okay, you are. Maybe you're not aware that you're affected. It's kind of like, just not being aware of our pain. And for some people, the trauma can be more, more severe on a spectrum than others, of course. Some people are adopted and they are attuned to. I have a colleague I went through, sorry, are you there?
Yeah,
I had an alarm go off. I have a colleague who was adopted that I went through the master's program with, who has an identical twin, and she was adopted with that twin, and she didn't really have a problem being adopted. And oftentimes I think, well, but you had somebody sharing your DNA. There is, and I don't want to water down or minimize her experience, because, her experience is her experience, but I didn't have anything. I literally used to tell Dwayne, like, I feel like an alien, or I feel like I just hatched out of an egg. And I didn't even always feel human, because I did not know my genetics. And it was really important for me to identify with my natural parents' genetics, not my adoptive. They used to try to say grandma and grandpa and have these stories. I did not relate, because those are not my genetics, and you can't force that. I mean, to me, when I hear stories about my grandmother and grandfather and my parents' family, I think they're interesting, but they're not mine.
Right. Wow. That is really, like, that kind of hit home. Like, you go, yeah, they're telling stories about their family, but you know, intuitively, it's not your family, not your genetic family, right? You can appreciate
Yeah,
it
sure.
in your life, but wow.
But it's
So
like,
good.
yeah.
And would you have any words of comfort for anyone who's maybe watching this in the future that's been adopted?
Well, I think being able to verbalize and understand that if there's angst about adoption, it's more than likely grief. It's
Mm,
unresolved grief, and they have to be allowed to grieve the loss. And a lot of mental health care professionals are not equipped to do that because they don't know. I went to a therapist for adoption issues when I was an undergrad, because I was starting to come to terms with adoption and reading these books and things. And she was supposed to be an adoption specialist. She was terrible, terrible. She didn't get attachment. And so I don't think you necessarily have to go to therapy to grieve adoption, but you have to find people that will attune to the adoption experience and give it validity in words, like David did for me.
fantastic. So let me ask you another favor. As you send me, I got your bio info. You'll send me your email address. Why don't you send me a couple books that we'll put in the description that were really, really good to you?
Oh, that's a great idea, because I'm horrible at remembering authors' names, but I can
Yeah.
definitely send you the books I've read that I can recall that are fantastic on adoption.
And we can just put the links to like Amazon in the description, and then we'll also put ICI counseling there, so folks, if people do want to connect
Right.
with a pastoral counselor or a clinician, they can go to the ICI website. We can be directed.
That's a great idea. And one of them will be a book by Dr. Siegel on neurobiology. It doesn't address attachment, but it addresses the neurobiology of attachment. And I think that's important to understand. Once people have language around adoption and why they have angst or sadness or anger, whatever it is about adoption, not feeling like they fit in, once they have that basic foundation, taking it up a notch and understanding the neurobiology of why they are experiencing what they're experiencing is very important and powerful.
Awesome. I love it. Cindy,
Cool.
thank you so much. Such a great talk as always. And let's plan part 2 and part 3.
Awesome. Sounds good, Phil.
Okay.
Thanks. I appreciate you, friend.
Right. Yeah, you too. Have an awesome day, and give Dwayne a punch for me or something. Okay.
I will. Yeah, I will.
Right.
Tell Jocelyn hi.
Yeah, we'll do. God bless you.
Bye.